Find out what's going on. Get involved. Change things from the inside. Make a difference. Take pride. Multicultural at its best. The Luisa Marshall Show. Coming up.
All news simply the best. Get involved. Racism has been a long-standing issue not only in our community, but all over the world for hundreds of years. Despite Canada's diversity and inclusivity, racism is a growing crisis amongst Asian Canadians during the pandemic. Anti-Asian crimes are multiplying in British Columbia and across Canada. On the show, Canada's Member of Parliament, Davies,
have always been with us.
His discussion on how racism has affected different Asian Canadian communities, how we can fight against racism.
To all Filipino Canadians and everybody who might experience this, is I want you to know that it's not acceptable and you're not alone.
Also on the show are highlights of its discussion with community leaders who experience racism.
Our success as a multicultural province, our success as a multicultural city, our success as a multicultural country did not eliminate racism.
All these coming up. Hello, hello, hello. We have a great show for all of you. We would like to welcome back a dear friend of the community to talk about a very important issue, racism. After his standing up to racism in our community town hall meeting.
And hate, and indeed genocide, have always been with us and unfortunately are still present either directly today or the vestiges are still with us.
And also acknowledge that anytime hate is allowed to take hold, if it's right now focused against Asian Canadians, hate is like a fire, it will spread. And we've all got a collective responsibility to give that hate no oxygen to breathe, no space to take hold.
It was heartbreaking for me to hear Filipino elders share their stories of fear and being afraid to leave their homes to get groceries and medication. And these sentiments of fear were shared by elders across Vancouver, across the province, and across our country.
Might be a little controversial for some, but one of the things that we saw coming out of Black Lives Matter is that multiculturalism, our success as a multicultural province, our success as a multicultural city, our success as a multicultural country did not eliminate racism.
Hello, Don. How are you?
Luisa, I'm doing as well as can be expected. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Since the last time we talked, it was COVID, and we talked about a lot about mental health and the restrictions, COVID restrictions that we're having in our country right now, and it's still COVID, unfortunately.
Nobody anticipated this, but hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm hoping vaccines will start to flow in the next few months, and hopefully by September, we'll be able to open up our economy and get back to our jobs and to be able to maybe take our masks off and actually converse with one another in a normal way. Thank you for joining our discussion last night. It was a real privilege for me to host such an important discussion. We had Jagmeet Singh, the leader of Canada's NDP and the very first leader of color in 150 years of Canadian history of any national party. We had Alden Habakon, a brilliant young Filipino Canadian who teaches inclusion and diversity, and Sarah Kim, who works at Collingwood Neighborhood House and works at the community level. And it was such an honor to bring these people with personal experience, all of them representing different parts of the Asian community, Korean, Filipino, South Asian, who have experienced racism on a personal level, but also professionally deal with it. The reason I wanted to host something on racism was, let's face it, it's always present in our society. I think it's always an important thing that we have to recognize and identify and challenge. But I think it's been particularly exacerbated during the COVID crisis for two reasons. I think, first of all, when people start feeling insecure financially or from the health point of view, they can tend to look for scapegoats. And second of all, there have been politicians like Donald Trump and even in Canada who seek to play the politics of division and blame. And there's been a specific focus on the Asian community. You remember Donald Trump calling this the China virus. And so I think that what we're seeing in our streets is an increase, particularly felt by members of the Asian Canadian community who have experienced insults, hate, sometimes even assault. And so I wanted to confront this. And I thought it's very important, particularly as a white male. I think it's my responsibility as well to stand up and lead a discussion to not only challenge this, but to name it, to identify it, to send a strong message it won't be tolerated, and frankly, to discuss ways that we can become a more diverse, inclusive, and tolerant society for everybody.
Peaceful Filipino Canadians have been physically and verbally abused in public places in Metro Vancouver. We're not even talking about outside Vancouver or all over Canada. What do we do to stop that after we heard of the fate of some Asian Americans that had been killed and some seriously injured by racist attacks?
Well, I think we as a society have to name it. You may have seen, or your viewers may have seen, just in the last week, there were two white guys at a pizza place on the west side of Vancouver who were making racial comments about the person who worked in that. There was a guy driving downtown who was giving the Nazi salute to some Indigenous protesters. And I think one thing that was good about it is that we're much quicker to call it out. So I think the first thing I would say is to all Filipino Canadians and everybody who might experience this is I want you to know that it's not acceptable and you're not alone. And I don't want anybody to be ashamed or to suffer in silence or think that somehow they deserve this, but they need to stand proud and report it. They need to report it to their families, to their neighbors, to their bosses, to the media, to the police, to politicians, because I think it's only by getting this out of the darkness and into the light where we name and shame this that we can better understand the nature of this and show victims that the vast majority of people do not support this kind of hate and this kind of intolerance. And but if we don't know what's happening, then we can't really deal with it. So, I think the sickness is in the secrets in this regard. It's one of our society's, longstanding secrets. By the way, anti-Asian racism goes back to the foundation of Canada with the building of the railway, to the Chinese exclusion laws, to the Japanese internment. And so it's baked into our structure and our systems and our history. And it's still with us today, sometimes in subtle forms. But I think in times like COVID or crisis, it brings it to the fore. And we need to have a serious national conversation about this problem and what we can do to change it.
Education. Number one. I know to get more action to your call, standing up to racism in our community, what do you think are your recommendations to Parliament for programs, laws, and bills that probably will help?
Well, first of all, thanks for raising education. I think you're bang on, Luisa. I mean, it's, I think it was Martin Luther King and I think even Nelson Mandela who said that children aren't born hating; they have to be taught. One thing I'd like to see is a complete examination of our curriculum, starting right down into kindergarten and preschool, and from grade 1s to 8. And I think it's very important that we seriously review that curriculum and not only take out anything that might be vestiges of racism, because it still exists in our structure. I made a comment the other day that when I grew up in the 1970s, I didn't learn about Indigenous genocide. I just learned about a railway. I didn't know that there were any people that had been affected by this. So we need to make sure we get those those symbols and structures of discrimination and intolerance out of our curriculum, and we need to replace it with positive images that show the real Canada as it exists today, which is a multicultural, multi-hued, very diverse society. And so I think it starts there. I think as well, we need to strengthen our hate laws. I mean, we have them on the books, but they're never used. The standard that has to be met in order to have a charge is so high that they're effectively not used at all. And I think what we need to do is we need to make changes to our structures. One example we used last night was a high school in my riding called Sir William Gladstone. By the way, if you went to Gladstone with me on any day this week, you would find that probably at least 3/4 of the people in that school, if not higher, are brown. They don't look like me. It's a brown school. And yet, Sir William Gladstone was a British Prime Minister who in the 1830s gave a speech in the British Parliament defending slavery. And his father was the largest slave-owning landowner in the West Indies. And yet here we have in the 21st century at a school that is multicultural, they're going into a school of higher learning with a symbol of it. And I think that's what we mean by structural racism. When we see symbols of intolerance or racism embedded in our structures, I think we have to recognize them, we have to change them. I mean, I called on the Vancouver School Board, and I think they're looking at this now to change that name. So I'd like to get our community involved in the renaming of these things. In the Filipino community, how many streets or schools or buildings are named after famous Filipinos? Very, very few. Yet the Filipino community is an extremely large part of our society now. So those are some of the things I think we as politicians have to be more alive to, and we have to start making changes so that people can see the society reflect the reality. And I think those things build a diverse view that has an effect, it has a positive effect.
We'll be back with you. Don't go away.
We believe that the best way to confront intolerance is to expose it, to challenge it, to discuss it, and to talk about ways that we can prevail against it.
Racism exists in all of our systems and structures and organizations that we navigate on a daily basis. This includes the education system, the carceral system, healthcare systems, all levels of government, and other bureaucratic systems.
A lot of mental health supports are not actually included in our public healthcare system. And I really believe we need to fix that. And that'll certainly help racialize people. And it'll help a lot of people that have been vulnerable. And it'll help people in general.
With the racism that we see on social media the past days regarding the allegations of Meghan and Harry during the Oprah interview, and our country, Canada, is a British Commonwealth country. And just for our viewers, for all those who don't know, but I know you knew this, Don, Canada first joined the British Commonwealth as an independent state in 1931. So to all the Filipino Canadians who don't know this, so we've been a Commonwealth as an independent state in 1931. So the Queen is our head of state, and also the Queen of UK, of Britain, is currently the head of state in 16 other countries, including Canada. So there's the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and several other nations in the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. So in your honest opinion, what do you think should be done by our Queen, our head of state, to put calm on the outrage by the many supporters of the Duchess?
Well, you know, that's a really brilliant insight, Luisa. You know, by the way, I always think Philippines and Canada, we share some very interesting commonalities. I mean, we both were colonized by European countries, Philippines by Spain, of course, and other countries, and Canada by Britain. So I think we've experienced that domination from a different culture. And I think actually even some of the roots of racism even begin there, when there's this dominance of a different culture and a feeling of submission and maybe inferiority that is imposed on people. And it takes a long time to get rid of it. for your viewers, it was very interesting to watch the interview with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle just in the last few days. And what's kind of sobering, I guess, is to see that racism permeates right into the royal family. I mean, as high a structure as that, you have someone dealing with questions about skin color. And so I think what that tells me, Luisa, is that this is a problem that permeates all aspects of society, from kings and queens down to us ordinary people that walk on the streets. And what should the Queen do about it? I mean, one of, I think, Meghan's main complaints was that the royal family was silent, in the face of, I think it was British tabloids that were overtly racist. They felt a lack of support from the Queen. And so what I think the Queen should do now, as the head of state for Canada and those countries, other countries as well, is to make a clear statement that this is unacceptable. And I think we all have that responsibility. By the way, I think we have that was a message we had last night, that it's our collective responsibility. Jagmeet told a story of, when he was a young, Punjabi boy in the schoolyard, getting beat up because he had some headgear on. If another student kind of intervened, and it didn't happen very often, then that helped set the stage. So I think all of us have a responsibility to speak up. If we see any kind of intolerance, we need to come to the defense of that person and send a clear message that this is unacceptable, and we need to stand with our fellow citizens. But I think there's a particular responsibility on people with the leadership reach and the megaphone of the Queen, because I think people listen to that, and let's face it, we take some of our messaging from our leaders, and if they're silent, that's almost an implicit message that it's okay. And we can no longer say this is okay. But I think we also have a duty to each other to be somewhat compassionate and to be working with each other to make each other us all more sensitive, because we're all on that path. And that, I thought, was a very powerful message coming from Alden, who, as a young Filipino boy, also experienced racism himself. So he didn't turn that into hatred. He turned that into greater tolerance and love. And what a powerful message that was.
These are the 4 characteristics that I think make this year stand out for us. 1, there's a strong sense that not being racist is no longer enough. So that's a big thing. Like, it's never been enough, but for some reason, there's this strong sentiment across the public, in the public sphere, that being kind to racialized people, being nice or nicer to Indigenous people, to Black people, that's not enough. Like, that's a good thing still. We still want people to aspire to not be racist, but that's no longer enough. There's more that we're demanding from our institutions, from our workplaces, from our daily lives. Number 2, not having a position, remaining silent, is in itself a position. So not actually speaking to this in a deliberate way does reveal something about your company. It does reveal something about your organization or you as an individual. And you should have a position, because not having a position is now seen as a position. And that's always been the case, but for some reason it feels stronger. We feel more deliberate. We feel clear on this. Number 3, and this might be a little controversial for some, but one of the things that we saw coming out of Black Lives Matter is that multiculturalism, our success as a multicultural province, our success as a multicultural city, our success as a multicultural country did not eliminate racism. And then number 4, we can no longer tolerate intolerance. In our effort to be open-minded, in our effort to be pluralistic, maybe we've been less diligent about this as we should have. And we've allowed a few things to spawn and gain momentum and go unchecked. And as Jagmeet said already, the threat is real. It's real and it's urgent. And we're watching, we're paying attention now in a way that maybe we should have always been paying attention.
Don, I'm just wondering, do multiculturalism work in Canada?
That's a great question. I got kind of educated myself on that. I mentioned that Canada was a multicultural country, and we aspire to be, one of the guiding lights in the world for bringing people from all corners of the world to live peacefully and harmoniously and to celebrate each other's cultures. And I think we've done a pretty good job. But what was pointed out was multicultural doesn't mean non-racist. And I thought that was a really powerful observation by our panelists last night, that sure, we've done a pretty good job of making our society one that is, it's very diverse, but I think the jury's still out in terms of how much more work we have to do to make sure that we're all treated equally and we're all respected for our individuality. I still think that there's a lot of underlying racism. I mean, we started out as basically a white European country, and I still think that that still is felt by people who don't reflect that heritage. I mean, I can ask you that, Luisa. I mean, you're a Canadian, a woman of color. I mean, what's been your experience in terms of your feeling of fitting into Canadian society?
I have to write maybe 6 or to 7 books to explain that. It's hard. It's a struggle. But the worst thing is, it's not only racism that is towards, that by Caucasians or white people. It's also racism by other people of color. So that is something that we really have to address.
Racism exists in all of our systems and structures and organizations that we navigate on a daily basis. This includes the education system, the carceral system, healthcare systems, all levels of government, and other bureaucratic systems.
See that video? It is a heartbreaking video of an Indigenous woman crying out for help while being made fun of, while being mocked, derided, while she lays in a hospital bed dying and actually eventually passes away. That is what the impact of systemic racism is, that people lose their life, whether it's in the healthcare system or in policing.
Ironically, last night while we were doing our town hall, there was the chat going out, and Jagmeet was bombarded in the chat
I see that.
Hindu nationalists that were attacking him. It had nothing to do with the topic, but they were attacking him. And so you're so right about, like, no culture is immune from being attacked, and no culture is innocent of attacking. And even, the history of Canada, there was terrible racism against Irish, against Eastern Europeans, Ukrainians, Poles, Jews, Italians. So that's why I said last night, the racism cuts across all lines. None of us are completely innocent. We're all potential victims. And so that's why I think we have a collective responsibility to let's make the 21st century in Canada one where we become a society of true tolerance and equality. And we'll probably never get there completely, but I think if we identify that as an aspiration and a principle, and we insist on it, and we name it, and we talk about it, and we help each other, and we enforce it, I think we can make it. We can do a much better job, and maybe be a bit of an example to the world.
Where can victims of racism go for support?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know that we have great places for them to go. I know we were talking earlier, Luisa, about, calling the police, but in some cases people have a fear and a distrust of police. I think people have to tell their neighbors, their families. I think we start there. Again, this can be something that causes shame and embarrassment. Victims have no reason to be embarrassed about this. They are innocent. But if you're on a SkyTrain somewhere on a bus and someone makes a comment or looks at you funny or does something, I think this has to be named. I think we have to report it to the people that are in authority in our lives, our priests, our bosses at work, our politicians. I think serious cases obviously should be reported to the police, because I think we have to expect our police to do a better job enforcing. Because, discrimination and intolerance can cross the line over to hate at a certain point, and that's a crime. It's a crime in Canada. We do have hate laws. And so I think there's a spectrum, but it starts with, let's not be silent about it. Let's speak up and tell everybody around us. And I think we'll find that people will be very supportive. I actually think that Donald Trump was talked down. I mean, it's hard to imagine Donald Trump being silenced about anything, but he wasn't successful in branding the coronavirus, the China virus. He tried, but there was a strong reaction to people saying, no, we're not branding a country or defaming a people over a human virus that could have started anywhere. And so that shows the power of naming and talking.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your service.
Well, and I encourage your viewers to contact their local politicians or even me. If I welcome anybody to contact me at any time with their experiences and issues, and we'll do our best to try to hook them up with some support if they need it. And we're always willing to listen. Oh, thank you. It's such a privilege, Luisa, and it's such a pleasure always to be on your show. Thank you for all you do and for taking an interest in this and, using your communication skills to bring this important message to your viewers. So stay well, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person and actually give each other a real hug.
Yes.
In a few minutes.
Mwah. Mwah. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Please don't drink and drive. Don't text and drive. Always be kind. Let's stop bullies and the coronavirus. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Stay safe. Mwah. See you next week. Bye-bye.